Welcome to the Coach Style Podcast, where I like to talk to athletes, trainers, and coaches for some of the advice, some of the trials, some of the tribulations, but also some of the successes and some of the things that they did to help them achieve their goals. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Coach Style Podcast. Today I am joined by the one, the only, the legend, the Bigfoot himself, Jon Huizinga. Jon, what up, man?
How we doing?
Good, man. I want to start off by giving people some of your background. You played for a very long time. You played 4 years at Michigan State. Between Indy and Pro Ball, you played 13 years professionally and competitively. You were primarily a reliever and a closer. You pitched over 646 innings as a reliever and closer. That's a lot of baseball. In 2014, uh, you have a perfect fielding percentage. I don't know if you knew that with the Brewers.
That's awesome.
You have a career. This is not even including high school, which I'm sure this would make this stat even more crazy. You have a career of 456 strikeouts to 232 walks.
Okay.
The you also
That's
started
interesting.
you also started and are the owner of Fuel Factory Sports, where you had the chance to work with countless athletes from 6 years old to guys in the show. And a lot of people from here in the Midwest actually know you by your social media channel, working with guys like Noah, Matthew, and Tariq. Um, and you're also currently helping out at Pinnacle High School. You're the varsity pitching coach, which, fun fact, your JV coach, Trey Warren, I played with him at Paradise Valley. So say hi to him
Let's
for me.
go. All
Yeah,
right, good. I will. Yeah, I
small
enjoy
world.
him.
Small
Yeah,
world.
he's good.
I really wanted to start off by talking because Fuel Factory is the place where I learned baseball. And again, I was finished playing when I started working for you, but it really showed me what the next level, what baseball was really about. What made you want to start Fuel Factory?
So originally, the idea of Factory was the backyard baseball lab. So it's basically giving pro guys, college guys, high school guys, young guys, just a place to be able to go and practice, where it was like away from not necessarily the field, but away from the game and into practice mode. So Fuel Factory kind of morphed out of Backyard Baseball Lab. Fuel Factory, the idea started in our backyard one day. We were talking, and Jose Flores, who I think you've met, and then Libby was there, and just a small group of us. But we were talking and just going through different. We were shooting names around, and we were just trying to figure out, hey, what's this next chapter gonna look like? And then after the draft, Matthew went to the Rays. I think it was 17th overall, if I recall properly. And his dad and I sat down, and he helped me start the idea of the facility versus the backyard,
Mhm.
which
I
was
know.
which was fun. It gave me, because Anthony Matthew's dad is a really good business guy, and for me, I'm player coach. Probably player first, then became coach over the time, right? But it was like the business side was, I mean, might as well have been another language for me.
Yeah. What I liked about Fuel Factory versus growing up in my professional career was always commercial gyms. And then eventually moving on to athletes and moving there. Commercial gyms have a very set, very corporate feel to them. Like it is a formula, it is a science. I remember the first time when we went to go pick up the stuff from Deer Valley to go bring it and just seeing the chaos that was Fuel Factory. And it was so different because I'm like, it was freaking me out because it wasn't set, it wasn't clean, it was all over. But what didn't check out the math that I had previously been exposed to was that chaos, that everything was all over the place, always worked out to the best, and it was so effective. So we had this where everything was everywhere. We had all these implements, all these tools, all these weights, everything you can ever imagine. And at that moment, every athlete had exactly what they needed when they needed it. And I loved how you brought the game of baseball that is chaos. I mean, best case scenario, half the people at the field want you to fail. Best case scenario, right? You brought the chaos, and it was so much easier to transition from the practice to the field, practicing at the facility to playing on the field. And I think a lot of people don't get the opportunity to pressure test or fire treat, but you gave them a place to fail safely and learn from that. And I loved about that. When did you discover chaos, and how did you discover that the ability to train successfully and bring chaos into it while still being able to control it?
So I'd say a lot of the inspiration came from Rocky Four. Like you see Rocky, how he goes to Russia and trains versus you
Yeah.
see how Drago's training. And it's like Rocky literally takes rocks out of the garage and ropes and chains. And I mean, and just the dust and the grit and so I was always inspired by that. Growing up, my dad was an engineer, so I had a bunch of weight equipment in my basement that was, like you're talking more, it'd be like a corporate setup. Everything was the same. It was always in the same spot. Um, you know, you rack your weights, you put everything away, it very, very typical. But then yeah, I think the backyard stuff, and then Fuel Factory obviously eventually was definitely Rocky Four inspired, and then just I think the chaos of my own playing career, where it was like, I played in Mexico, I played in Canada, I played affiliated, I played independent, a lot of independent. Played at Michigan State, which was really organized. So it was taking different pieces of it and just kind of going with what I felt was the most important to get it to the game, because a lot of the stuff that I see training wise is what I call chasing your tail, where it's like seeing how hard I can throw a ball into a wall, or which there's time and place, there's some value for that. But to me, at the end of the day, if it wasn't getting somebody out in between the lines, you talked about those late innings that I threw,
Hmm.
there wasn't a lot of time to just go out there and do, whatever else you want to say. It was like survival time. It was like, what's going to work today? Um, but the chaos kind of started too, because just in my career, I dealt with so much of it, whether it was bus trips or food or hotels or just all the constant changing variables. Even though they were similar, if you were looking from the outside, there was just differences. So I thought that with chaos, and with a lot of my athletes, we have this conversation where it's like, yes, I want you to have structure, and yes, I want you to have routines, but at the same time, I want you to have what I call A through Z routines. A routine is like you show up, everything's on time. You got to eat what you wanted. You slept in your own bed. You got to listen to your own music. A routine is like all of your stuff. That's going to only happen a small percentage of the time, right? So it's like starting to develop your B routine. Hey, you didn't get to eat what you wanted. You had to get this or that. Or, hey, it's raining today. There's no BP. There's just so many different variables where it was like, okay. And I think the other fun part too, that'll make you smile too as a coach, but it was like with Libby, especially Libby challenged me a lot, because he would come sometimes 2, 3 times a day. So it wasn't like just a standard kid where I'm going to say, hey, you're going to do this, this, and this today, and then see you later. It was like, well, we've already done this. We already did this. We already did this. You lifted at school. You already threw at school. What are the other things that we can do to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's? It was focus band. It was box breath. It was jump rope. Single leg stability. It was just all the little things that kind of come in. And then as a coach, it was like on a given day, I have a lesson with a kid, but he threw a bullpen last night. Are we going to throw a bullpen again? No. We're going to go and we're going to do some other stuff. We're going to dive into some areas where, I think a lot of times we got to go where you're uncomfortable as well, which is the big thing with Rocky and Rocky Four, right? Like he could have just trained at his home, his house. He had the gym. He could have done everything, but it was like, no, he wanted to go where it was harder than the game. So, like
Hmm.
in practice, the chaos theory is to make it harder so that when you're in the game, you're just adapting.
I wanted to ask you a question, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. With chaos, there comes organization, right? Like you can let a guy run. And I remember I'm going to do this because I know people at Fuel Factory at Impact Training will laugh at this because one of my first years I got thrown in. I was trying to help with the little guys, and we were doing something called a core class. And core was basically speed, agility, basic body movements, that kind of stuff. Well, these guys were 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and I was having a hard time because I set it up like these are college, high school guys. Like this is a drill. This is why we do it. Well, when you're that age, you don't care about that. You want to go have fun. And I remember struggling so hard. Nobody really had the answers. And then I remember asking you about this. I remember asking you this question. How did you do it? Because you seemingly ran these pitching classes that it was so easy, so effortless, and it was like grooved. Everybody was moving in the right direction. And you gave them a lane to run in. They could do whatever they want in that lane. They could chaos and go have fun. Go for it. But that way. And then you set up the lane where they were going to get the feel. And what makes me think about it was like we had the big trash can with baseballs. We had two lanes and targets. You had them hopping through tires to feel backside or pull downs or up or focus or breath and high fives as they came back through the line. And all of a sudden, like to a kid, yeah, I'm having a good time. I'm having a blast. I'm having fun. But as a coach, you just sit back there and go, this guy's a genius, dude. Like it's so effortless. And they don't even know they're being coached because they're having fun. And after I took that approach, I gave them a lane, smooth sailing. So when I have the chaos, it's just organized chaos. If we take that and we push that out to higher level guys where performance starts to matter, say high school, right? People start to try and take the jersey off your back. If you had a guy that was very, very dedicated and you knew exactly, well, let me rephrase. Do you think there's a blueprint to make a dude if he has what it takes genetically? Do you think you can make a dude?
I think the blueprint's going to look different for each guy, and I think that this is a good topic. But when we talked about, okay, why did we start Fuel Factory? Well, when we started Fuel Factory, another reason, one of the ideas was that we had a system that worked. Okay, and that system worked for many guys, but it really worked for the guys that used it more. So, like, if I was to say that let's say there's characteristics, the formula may be different for each guy, but I think like the characteristics, the first one I think of is just is grit. Like guys that, to me, guys that are okay to get dirty, guys that are okay if there's some rust on my weights. Like I have certain stuff that's like I could show you. I got Bigfoot spray painted on my weights, right? I spray painted that on there, right? There's certain stuff where it's like if I see certain people that turns them off, I'm like, I don't, because baseball is so far from perfect.
Mhm.
And that's part of where the chaos theory fits in too, where it's like you watch a perfect game, that guy missed his spots. That
Right.
guy screwed up stuff, but it still ended up in that way. Very rarely, right? But I think to say there's a perfect blueprint, or like, I see some of the stuff online where guys will say, if you hit this metric, this metric, this metric, and this metric, you'll hit this metric.
Mhm.
And I would just say no. I've just seen, the guys that we've trained.
Mhm.
We're around 250 major leaguers now that have been through our doors, and I've never seen one that had the exact same routine or did the exact same throwing program or had the same mechanics or the same lifting program. There was there was variation within it. So I think like if I was to start with one of those characteristics, grit. Next one would be like determination, somebody that gonna continue to show up even when the results aren't like this. Some people think, hey, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna get this, but results are never linear in this game.
No.
So it's like
Yep.
guys that can guys that can be in that chaos that you're talking about, but that stay here
Mhm.
mentally, right? Where it's like, and I think a lot of the stuff too is like taking guys outside their comfort zone. It's first you got to realize where their thresholds are, and then you got to be able to kind of start to slowly raise that bar for them or raise the roof or
Yeah.
teach them teach them things that are going to allow them to get out of their own way a lot of time. But I mean, I would argue with anybody that there's no magic formula, there's no magic pill. Just those characteristics, and then I think another one to throw in there is consistency, right? Where it's like if I have a guy like we talked about Matthew Libertor already, but if I have Matthew Libertor, he's going to show up consistently. And guess what? Not only is he going to show up consistently with me, but he's going to do stuff at home in his garage, in his upstairs, in his backyard. He's going to be doing things in between when I see him that he's like, I call it like, you're planting a garden. We dig a hole day one, we plant a seed. You go home, he's watering it and giving it sun by practicing it, mentally and physically. What do you think on that? You think there's
I have, oh my god, it's so dynamic. There's so many things, and I think one of the things that I learned from you was that it's not about me. I've
Mhm.
played. I'm done. And the humility to as a coach, I remember hearing you say this and it didn't quite click. And I remember thinking about it, probably took over the course of 2 to 3 weeks of me just thinking about it and seeing it because there was something that you have as a coach. And it's not necessarily the typical authoritarian. Now, I've seen Zing become the pterodactyl, but you have something like you're yeah, you're tapping into it, but it's so much of a player, as a guide, as a mentor, as a brother, as a teammate. And you said something that stuck, and I've said it before, and it's so stinking true. Player always comes first. I'm just part of the journey. The goal is keep going, like move on, keep going. And I remember hearing that, and all of a sudden it just coaching like blossomed, I guess, for me because I started looking at it a completely different way. If you think about how can I advance my career, how can I put my name on this guy, when that's not the case. It's just there, and I think getting around to this point because I wanted to ask you if you noticed something. You had mentioned over 250 big leaguers have come through fuel factory stores, let alone the guys when we talked about the summer bullpens or anything like that. They come to or big league clubs asking you to be a consultant, right? There's something about Jon Huizinga when it comes to pitching. There's something about you that you're able to connect, that you're able to communicate, that the frequency, the vibe that brings all those different personalities, all those different athletes who think differently, act differently, process differently, that seem to gravitate towards you and that you can help them with. What do you think that is about you?
a great question. Well, I mean, I think if the first word that comes to mind would just be authenticity, just because I am who I am. I see a ton of imposter syndrome out there. Guys acting like they know a whole bunch of stuff they don't know, or like they reinvented the wheel, or they made something up. I think, my ability to connect to guys is probably partially that I played. That does help. And then I think part of it's got to be the servant mentality too, where it's like they come first versus I
Mm,
think a lot of times, especially talking with guys in the off season, when they're playing in an organization, the coaches in that organization work for that organization and they don't work for the player. I'm not saying they don't help. There's guys that definitely help players,
right.
but it's different than when you come in the off season and it's like it doesn't matter what the team wants, it matters what your goals are and what you want. And I think that there's got to be something relationship wise that guys connect to. Um, I think a lot of it's word of mouth too. Just it's a small world in what we do, and I think guys have came in and said like, I think guys know too. Like, hey, some guys come in just for the culture and the environment,
Yes.
right? And I've kind of gone
100%.
through and like I could bucket guys where it's like I have guys who I've maybe said 30 words to when they're in there for the day. And it was probably part of it was, gibberish, half a doodak, a bad wad, a hoot high five, something where because they already know what they're doing, they were just there to do something. Now there's other guys where it's like they'll come in and maybe they have a question and the question will start, some stuff. The other guys might be they're throwing and I have a question. and that kind of starts some stuff. But I feel like within the realm of all the guys who have came in, there's a certain, I think the student of the game within me is it within them. So it's like when like attracts like, and I think when you're putting that out and you see, I think obviously some credibility with the other guys who have been in, but I think the other part's just the love of the game and then being a student,
I can
which
100%.
would be what would attract me, because I mean, even putting a place together, it's like, okay, what would I want? Like if I was coming in here, what would I want? Okay, I'd want a dirt mound. I'd want weight equipment. I'd want other dudes. I'd want like a clubhouse kind of feel. I'd want good music, right? So a lot of times for me too, it's like, hey, what do you like when you're on the mound? You know that from being around, where it's like
You
whoever's on
asked
the
me
mound.
that question.
Yeah, well, it's big, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
I was talking to my buddy Eugene Bleecker the other day. I know Bleak, but we were talking, and he was. I'm getting ready to play in some tournaments coming up, and so I sent him some video, and I'm like, "Hey, what do you see?" And he goes, "Well, send me some video of you when you were really good." And I'm like, "Okay." I go back 2006 is kind of it was my all-star year. I was really good. I mean, I sat 94, 96. I had good slider. Everything was there. But I sent him video and he goes, zing. And he's kind of laughing. He's like, I got to tell you, there's a scout friend of mine who, when I ask him what he's looking for, he says, does the music in their head match the delivery of what they're doing? And
Yo.
he was calling me out because he's like, dude, your delivery is all you.
Yeah.
And he fired me up because it is, and I mean, because I have a unique delivery and I have some unique things that I do in my delivery to create the shapes on the pitches that I have, right?
Right.
Um, but we were just talking about it and just laughing. But when he said that, it really resonated with me because, well, I like to know what guys listen to. I like to know what they like for food. I like to know, just certain elements about guys because it's way more than just your mechanics. You know what I mean? A lot of times, a guy will sit there and I've seen it, right? I'm sitting with coaches and they don't even know somebody and they're sitting there and saying what they're doing right or wrong. And I'm like, okay, if I can see that from a lens, but is that what they're thinking about? Right? Is that what makes them tick? Like what makes you tick? When it's 3-2 count bottom of the ninth, game seven World Series and the game, all the chips are on the line, is it gonna come down to having perfect mechanics? No, it's going to come down to what's inside here that you can send out right into that pitch or that swing or that play or I'm a big believer. I think the game's played at a soul level when you see the
Mhm.
highest level guys. You can see little guys, sometimes just playing whatever, but you start to see somebody that's really they're playing at that soul level where it's an expression of who they are in that moment. That's the beauty. That's the art to me that just keeps me on it every day.
It's funny that you say that. There, Scott, do you know Scott Main pitched for the Cubs? He's one of our pitching guys at Impact. Um, I think
I don't
he
know, but
actually,
I've heard the name.
so he played at University of Miami, and then I think he was with the Cubs. And I have to look back. I think it's the kind of the years I was in high school. I think it was after 2010, 2011. But he was a reliever, and he's a lefty. Um, I've seen it with you. I've seen it with almost every guy that has come in and has been able to perform at a high level of pitching mound. The way I define it is every great pitcher has a couple things in common. And again, there's always variables. Pedro Martinez kind of throws this curve off, but they're tall. They
I
throw
love Pedro.
hard. They're
Pedro's
tall.
10 feet tall, dude. I don't know what you're talking about. That
They're
dude is
tall.
10 feet tall.
They throw hard, and they have the ability to become a psychopath on the mound. They can flip a switch. Now, when they get off the mound, they can be the greatest guy in the world, but they have that ability when they're there, they turn into a predator. And it's the funnest thing because as a pitcher, like you're seeing this, you're seeing the plate, you're seeing the hitter, you're seeing me, you're seeing the umpire, you're seeing fans. My point of view, I see you and I see the facial expressions and I watch it happen. And when I tell catchers all the time, because a catcher's main job is to help that pitcher come off the field with the rest of everyone else so we can go hit, not that they get pulled. And the way I explain it, I'm like, they're all horses. Some of those horses are big, some of them are fast, some of them are strong. Some of them you need to like give them a carrot. Hey, you're doing all right. You're doing good. Some of them it's like you smack them like let's go. And you got to identify that horse. And when you
Mm,
see that thing change, you're like, let's go. He's here. Come on. And it's fun to watch.
I
And to
love
where the way that you just described it was so much more of a the heart, and I love that you said the soul of it. That is so much deeper, and I think it's more what's the word for it? Just it's so much better of an explanation, so much deeper, so much more detail to it. Because you're right, every single one of them has their own rhythm, has their own vibe, I guess would be the way to put it.
Yeah, I
What do
think
you
your authenticity comes out when you're throwing when you're at that level, right? Like when you're at the
Yeah,
head level, sure there's things in this game that are at the head level, but I think I was talking with our buddy Cam Ginger, and we were talking about outliers, and it's something I like to talk about all the time. Where it's like, you're scouting, you're looking for players, everybody you have to fit into this bucket or this box, right?
yeah,
Well, now that you're in this box, if you're in the middle of that box, you're probably not there. You're seeing all the guys that are the outliers on the outside edge, right? The guys
yeah.
that, maybe are Trevor McGill, 6'7", 240 pounds, throwing
Big boy.
102 hammer, right?
Yeah.
Played water polo as a kid. There's certain elements that are, martial arts guy.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things in there that yes, you see that come out when he's on the mound, but
Yeah.
he's coming out to Metallica. Do you see
Yeah.
Metallica when you see him all day long? Right? There's different guys, and you see a lot of times you can spot when it's not there, and I think that's
Right.
what like these scouts typically are looking to do. Like you give them a list of 100 guys. Hey, these 100 guys all have the physical characteristics to pitch. Now, what are the separating factors that we've seen for guys that can make it and make it for a long time? It's like one of those first things is they got to figure out who they are. They got to know who they are. And
Right.
then that's who they got to be when they're out there. For some guys, it's an alter ego, right? Like I talk with a lot of guys where it's like, okay, off the field, you're this. When you're on the field, you're this. Now, I steal it from boxing because I think boxing's great, but it's like they say, train like a contender, fight like a champion, right? Or we've talked about Libby a couple times. So with Matthew, when he was coming up, especially once he was about 16, 17 and really bringing it and was already pretty special, my buddy Matt Hammonds was over. We were watching him and we're like, we need an alter ego for this kid, but it's got to be the other. And meaning he's going to pitch like Libby. That's who he is. But when he trains, he needs to train like he's a 5'8" right-handed pitcher that throws 82 miles an hour. We're going to name him Javi. So we named him Javi, and Libby would laugh if we talked about this, but he had to be Javi when he trained because if he just showed up as Libby, he didn't need to do anything.
Right.
And you see a lot of guys like that, right? Where it's like, hey, they just show up at practice and they're really good and they're just content with that. But for Libby, we talked about, I mean, we've been envisioning a Hall of Fame plaque in his visualizations. So if you're going to be a Hall of Fame type of guy, you can't do what everybody else does. You've got to go above and beyond. And it's funny how you can kind of flip that switch where it's like, okay, you're a 5'10" right-handed guy that's throwing 82. How are you going to get noticed? Well,
Right.
you better hustle, you better, all these things.
Right.
But then when you go out to the mound and you compete, dude, I want, like I said, Pedro's 10 feet tall and bulletproof. That's what we say. We're 10 feet tall. We're bulletproof. Body language, king of the
Right.
hill, cough, whatever you want to call it, all that mindset stuff where it's like, here we go.
Yeah. I think so. I started playing baseball when I was 15, and I'm not sure if it was preset or I got lucky, but I literally picked up a baseball after I got hurt playing football, and I had a thoracic back injury, and I like wasn't able to do anything for 6 weeks, and I was like, I can go play baseball. Literally got a glove from Kmart, went out, made the team, saw our catcher sucked, and was like, I can catch. Didn't have gear. They let me borrow gear. I used the Kmart glove, and then I started catching ever since. The mindset that I had was like, "Oh, these guys have been playing for a decade already. Like, I have to work harder. I have to play catch up." And that just like, I'll go. Now, hard work is hard work. It's great if you're going in the right direction. But like, if I go tell you to dig a hole, will it help you throw harder? I don't know. Grip strength, maybe. But there's better ways to do it.
Hmm.
Um, and hearing where that alter ego, I love that story because you had the problem, even though you had all the talent, all the resources in the world, and literally all it took was a little nickname and a mindset shift. And then you have, "Oh, we're off. We're going
Hmm.
again." Did you have
Well,
something like that?
Hambone's a genius, right? Like he's the dude pitched for I think 17 or 18
Mm,
years. He's the guy that invented our pitching tunnels we use, but
yeah.
he's just certified. I mean, that dude's a genius, man, and he's got enough experience where it's like, hey, he's seen. You play 18 years of pro ball. How many left-handers have you seen that throw 95? I mean, a lot, right? Like I've seen a
Right.
lot of guys that had plenty of talent, like
Yeah.
a bunch,
Yeah.
but you see him get weeded out real quick by the game. So it was more of a gritty thing.
Yeah.
And Libby loved it. I mean, he's a grinder. He likes to get down and into it. He's not just
Yeah.
a show up and see you guy,
Yeah.
And to me, there's two different types of grinders too, right? Like we've had this conversation, I think, but there's a grinder that mentally is just like, oh man, this is such a grind. To me, I don't like that grinder. That kind of
No.
salty shit around me, I don't like
It's a
it.
cancer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but what I do like is I like the grinder that's like, I like a good Himalayan pink crystal salt or like a Celtic sea salt, the kind that
Mhm.
comes in the little blocks. And you
Yeah.
get the grinder, the kind that actually like takes something that's like this and makes
Mhm.
it useful. So
Mhm.
to me, a grinder by definition, that's the grinder I want. I
Mhm.
don't want the guy that's the complainer. That's a different kind of
Yeah.
like maybe the athletic trainer that you sit next to and he's grinding through it's August and he's ready to go home and see his family. I get it. I'm
Right.
not saying he's not grinding too. He is. But I want the salt grinder dude. I want the guy that's taking something and then he's making something of it. Right. And that's his ability. And he's willing to navigate and grind through the uncomfortable and the tough. And then at the end of the day, it's this beautiful salt. You can put it in your water, you can drink it, you got all these trace minerals, and yeah, now you're just yeah.
One of
Oh
the
man.
guys we talked about him a little bit earlier, and Hambone, I miss that dude. He actually helped us set up Fuel Factory. The actual set. I remember him getting on a ladder and acting like a wild man, putting those things into concrete 15 feet above the ground, just one
Yeah, with one
handed.
hand.
Crazy
Yeah,
animal.
savage.
And he's one of the guys, like, you see him and you're like, "Who is this dude? Like, where did John pick this guy up at?" And you find out he is a phenomenal baseball mind. He's a hell of an athlete. He's a great dude in the world. And then you find out he actually lives on his own little ranch, and he works
Mhm.
his butt off every single day, and he is one of the hardest workers. And I actually that was the first time I had the opportunity to, throw in one of the throw through nets, right? It's a throw through net, right? It's been
Yep,
a hot
yep.
second. What was if you can, because if you guys haven't seen this, go check this out. Do you remember what his website was for the Nets?
I want to say it's still pitchingtunnels.com,
Pitching tunnels. Okay.
but he has it's if you look up throw through, but
Uh,
he's these originally started, he had a place where we were training guys, we call it the pitching palace, which was it
mhm.
was awesome. And we had tunnels just everywhere. And originally it was like a square.
Uh-huh.
There was more of a rectangle at release, and then it would taper to the strike zone.
Right.
Then we started to get different slots, different pitches. We wanted guys that wanted to hit. And that's when he dropped it down and it goes all the way to the ground. And
Mhm.
he's made a few units where it's like you could do, ground balls in there, you could do your hitting,
Right.
you could do anything. So he calls that like the all sport tunnel.
Yeah.
But the one that we have is made for the pitching zone, so it's 54 feet of net and it just tapers right to the strike zone. It's awesome.
It's crazy how when you just step into there and you're just standing on the mound or even flat ground getting ready to throw through, your brain automatically goes, "What do I have to do? How do I have to shape this to get it through?" And it was such a natural, like, you didn't have to think. You just went.
I
And
love it. I think it's one of the best tools out there because it gives immediate feedback without words. So
mhm.
like a lot of times words, we've talked a lot about this. Words can be confusing because how you hear something's different than how the other guys hear it
Yeah.
sometimes. But with the net and the tunnel, it's like, okay, if I throw and I hit the net, I know my arm was outside of this, and Trevor McGill's that we talked a lot about this, but he was throwing in there because sometimes we'll go to one side or the other to train different things. But he's like, I really like the feeling when my arm's in the middle of the tunnel. So like when you see how it's tapered, it's not necessarily that we just want you to be in a straight line. It's like find where your slot is or your plane and then just party right through there. But find where the arm's in the center. We see these throws all the time where guys are like that versus like the guys that are, and I think that's why, the idea of throw through, came about.
I like that, and I think Fuel Factory was full of tools and I guess resources is the best term for it to cover it all. But stuff like that, there was always something that it would give you immediate feedback. I'm thinking of the mitt or um was it is the King of the Hills with the mound that clicks
Yep.
back. There's
Yep.
always so many things like that. Do you guys that you can just tell them and they'll get a feel? Or do you think most guys have to do with gadgets or tools? Do you think they learn better or mixed bag?
I think it's a mixed bag. Some guys hear stuff like 100% for what it is. So like if you tell somebody whatever, an old phrase like stay back, right? Like they may take it so actual that they stay back even with their lower half. Whereas if you teach them, hey, stay back is an upper half cue, we're going to allow the lower half to do its thing, but the upper half is going to be what stays back. That might be a different, type of cue. So I think,
Right.
different guys, different things. I like a combination of like eyes closed stuff. A lot of times shows me instinctive stuff. Non-dominant side, especially with the PVCs and water bags, where it's like
Or
you
a
can see,
cartwheel?
or a cartwheel. Yep, like
Yeah.
things that are natural, but maybe
Yeah.
that become unnatural because let's say it's your swing. You've worked on your swing so many times that you have all these thought processes to get you to a place.
Right.
Versus if I say, hey, take a left-handed swing and your last left-handed swing was playing wiffle ball, it's probably going to be a pretty sweet swing as far as, especially D cell pattern. Now
Right.
the connection to the hand eye and your whatever you want to call it, that might be a little bit, but a lot of times non-dominant side will show us the D cell. I think typically with males, a lot of time we're very visual. So like if I can do a combination of okay, this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like. Now what does it feel like to you? Right? Because it's like my words of feel might be different than yours. Or it's like, hey, if I say, hey, we're gonna do this drill and we're gonna talk about it after, but it's like, okay, what are we looking to accomplish with this goal or with this drill, right? What's the goal of this drill? And then is it working or is it not working? And for some guys, it's just trial and error. It might be a grip, right? All of a sudden we got somebody that wants, I'm pulling up a ball here, but somebody that throws their fastball like this, and we're like, well, hey, what's it feel like to throw it like that? Or hey, they throw it like that, and it's like, hey, what's it feel like to throw it like that? Or hey, have you ever tried this? But I think a lot of times through trial and error, guys can kind of find out. And I guess trial and error with contrast, guys can find their middle ground where they're, contrast being like hot water, cold water, or like opening your stance, closing your stance, throwing from a high slot, throwing from a sidearm slot. In reality, if I told you to throw a sidearm, how low is your arm going to go? Maybe. I bet you it doesn't even go that low, right? Because it's like you're typically in great, or like for me, if you said, hey, throw over the top, this is probably about as
Yeah.
high as you're going to see me. If you told me to
Yeah.
go low, but what you're going to see is you're going to see a little bit of variability
Yeah.
in there. And then you're going to find where it's like, okay, now where's the output the best? So I think that's the other thing is with the feedback of the drill, if we're doing a velocity drill and we're not using a radar, then are we really doing a velocity drill? Or if we're doing like a command drill and we're not throwing at a target to see if we hit that target, is that really a command drill? Right. So it's like finding the outcome. And I think, with the chaos theory, it's like, okay, we need to blend these things together. We need
Right.
some command, we need some full rip, we
Yeah.
need some feel. So I think a lot of times it's funny because we call it fuel factory, right?
Right.
But a lot of times two guys will leave and they call it the feel factory because they
Yeah.
left with feel. It wasn't a thought or it wasn't a this perfect exercise that's going to guarantee you 5 miles an hour next week or your money back. Just because, you
Yeah.
know, the, and I'm joking on that, but it's
Yeah.
so real, especially out here in Phoenix. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you get some of it there, but the imposter syndrome is so, and if you go online, you see, I mean, every day you're going to see
Oh,
a new somebody that pops up. And to me, the imposter thing is like guys see stuff, they think it's really easy. I can do that.
yeah.
Especially like online
Well,
coaching. I see a bazillion guys doing online coaching, and I'm like, man,
well, uh,
is that really who you want to learn from?
I want to make sure that this comes across clear because he's helped a lot of guys, and I think like certain guys need to hear something a certain way. If you keep saying the same thing, eventually, what a clock's right twice, a broken clock is right twice a day. Not
There
saying
you go.
that he's wrong, but his marketing has been very divisive. Teacher man, the hitter,
Okay. Yeah.
and Cam and
I've
I've
heard of
talked
them.
about him a lot, but he's 35 minutes south of me.
Oh,
Like if I
really?
go and say he's here. So it's funny you said you probably got some guys out there, and I'm like, I can think of one social media presence who, and I kind of feel bad because he uses a marketing team, and his marketing team has used that ploy. So I don't even know. I've never met the guy, but I know he's helped a couple swings for sure. And then I'd like to revisit
yeah,
my answer on sidearm. So
yeah,
it
yeah.
would not be here; it would be here, except I would tilt. I would use a torso tilt.
Because you're smart. Yeah, well, that's
Yeah,
what we'd want, right? But it's like,
yeah,
so I had a lesson last night, and it was with two twin brothers, and I've worked with them for a little while, but sometimes it takes a little while to kind of find who they are and how they move, and you see them enough.
right.
But then typically, I like to give guys like an MLB comp,
Hmm.
somebody that they can look at that throws some, within variance how they throw, right?
Right.
And the one brother throws like the Yenier, and I might be messing up his first name, but Cano, the guy from
Mhm.
Baltimore Orioles. Filthy, right? Lower slot, really stays behind it. Um, I mean, I guess you'd almost be in the sidearm range, ish, if you wanted to
Yeah.
call it that. And then the other brother throws like Doc Gooden, who, if you've ever seen Doc Gooden, just like is much straight over the top. I mean, super athletic. Um, but two completely different deliveries, even though they're literally twins that were born, within however many minutes of each other with the same mom, same dad.
Right.
And the funny thing is like when I'm talking to the dad too, and we're going through stuff, and it's like some coaches have told the one that throws like Cano, hey, you need to get on top. Where no, okay, maybe, yes, he needs to throw on top of his glove side probably, but he doesn't necessarily need to get on top. And part of it's because the way his body moves, right? Like if you see his brother who throws like Doc Gooden, this kid's T spine is silly. And he can literally like just start going down the hill and he just goes up and over. Whereas the other brother has to kind of, create a different move.
Right.
But it's, I think it's that same thing where it's like if I just had a cookie cutter and you were sitting here and I have one way to do this, and I'm like, okay, here you go. You got to do this drill and this drill and this drill, and then you got to do this lift and this lift, and then now you'll become this. And it's like
Right.
I would swing and miss so much on guys versus like a lot of times we have success allowing guys to be who they are and finding their
Right.
natural movement patterns and slots a lot of times without even throwing a baseball.
Right.
Taking them through some of the assessment process or taking them through a movement screen or a movement prep where it's like, did we even talk about mechanics?
Right.
We didn't have to talk about mechanics. What we talked about was winding and unwinding your body, the
Yep.
four corners of the body working together, and then it's like all of a sudden now we see these things, but there's no one way to say, hey, this is how it's done. But
Right.
with a lot of the cookie cutter coaches I see or the
Right.
imposters, that's how I spot it, where it's like, okay, you've been teaching pitching for 15 years and you're still teaching the same thing to every guy.
Right.
And I'm not saying keep because I mean, if you look back 15 years, I'm still teaching a lot of the same stuff. I'm not saying reinvent the wheel and make it different. I'm saying
Right.
each guy might have a different pattern
Right.
within range, right? But it's style versus flaw.
Hmm.
So if it's a style thing, if I'm watching a guy and I see some like a kick, he's got a little kick to him and he does this throw and it works. That's a style. If
Right.
I see a guy who's kicking and all of a sudden it throws off his delivery, and let's say struggles throwing strikes, okay, then that may be a flaw and we may want to look at it, right? But the
Right.
idea, even with those adjustments, most of the time it's just with a chisel and a hammer and
Yep.
sandpaper. We talk about this, right? But there's not a
Right.
sledgehammer. Even with a kid, I'm not bringing some kid in, breaking the foundation down and then starting. No, we're looking at the foundation, and then we're coming in and we're taking away anything
Right.
that which is not that.
Yeah.
We're not adding to it. And I think that's mentally where a lot of these guys struggle too, is they're always looking for that next thing that they're going to add to them that's going to make them be something more than they are. When a lot of times you already have what it takes. And we talk about all the guys that have came in. I've seen every body shape and every size, right? I mean, remember Brandon Finnegan came in, you caught him. One of the
Still
smoothest, best deliveries we've ever seen in our
my
life.
my favorite pitcher I've ever caught in my life. Ever.
Yeah, I believe that. And he's
I mean,
awesome.
super easy.
But how about him compared to, let's say, Penn Murphy or Trevor McGill or
Oh,
Eric
different
Yardley
different
or
horses,
Matthew
man.
Liberatore or any of these guys?
Yeah.
Or this offseason it was fun seeing like Corbin Burns and Josh Hader
Yeah.
a lot of times back to back, and it was like you saw two completely different things that were getting
Mhm.
really good results on the end. And if you only had one way to look at it, then how are you going to ever help these guys? Versus
Right.
like, and then you got to get to kind of know them a little bit, know what makes them tick, which is I
Right.
know what you're doing too is you're taking the time to get into the personal level where it's like, hey, if I know what this guy listens to, I know what he likes for food, I know what if he's got a family,
Right.
if he's got if he's a young guy, if all these different things that get into it, and then it helps you to guide them better. Because once again, like
Mhm.
you said earlier, it's not about me, not
Right.
about you. It's about us being a guy that's like, hey, look over there and see that and go in there.
Mhm.
And it's like any good teacher, you lead them to the doorway, but then you let them go through first.
Right.
And you're coming with, and you're with them, and you're helping them anytime they need it. But at the same time, you're allowing them to go and do that. Because a lot of
Right.
times, I could go for days, but when it comes to player development, a lot of times you got to let a guy fail before you're going to fix him or change him. Because if what they're doing is working, why would you change it? It
Right.
can't just because you think the physical mechanics that in your mind are the way they need to be. If I got a guy that's throwing strikes, he's changing speeds, he's getting guys out, and it looks a little bit different, and he's healthy, I'm not messing with it. He might be
Right.
one of those outlier guys, right? It's one of those things where it's like you let nature be what nature is, right? I go
Right.
watch. I love creeks and rivers and all that stuff. You know that I go to Sedona a
Yeah.
lot, but it's like those rocks are all unique and different. They're all
Right.
rocks. They're all trees. I went up to the redwood forest not that long ago, and I see even clones of the same tree that look similar, but they're not exactly the same.
Right. That makes me think of a Terry Poles quote, Grandpa Poles.
Ooh.
He, uh, he said he said 2 things that will always stick in my head. He goes, "Todd, do you know how to be a great hitting coach?" I was like, "No." He goes, "Have great hitters." He goes, "The second he goes, the second thing is never ever make a 400 hitter a 280 hitter." He goes, "Think about Hunter Pence or Guerrero Sr., right?" He goes, "If they're doing something and it works, it works. Don't touch it. Just let them be them." And I'll never forget that because God, he would build me up, and then I would be laughing. I was giggling a little earlier because what you were saying about different guys need different things reminded me of a story of when, because I remember telling Kaylee this, of at Fuel Factory. I knew you were crazy. I knew it. And I just didn't know the genius behind it. So I remember walking in, I'm like, there's a bowling pin there. Why do we have a bowling pin? Because I used to be a mechanic at a bowling alley. And I was, why do we have a bowling pin? He goes, you go pick it up. He goes, it's for throwing. I was like, wait, what? It's for throwing? Because at this point I thought it was like rigid. Like, this is how you make a catcher. This is how you throw. And it's these drills. You're like, pick it up. I was like, okay. He goes, no, no, from the other end and throw it. And it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, oh my God. this isn't just crazy. There's a reason behind this. And I remember going home and telling Kaylee because she's like, John doing anything crazy today, and like he did. But I think the problem is like he's a genius. Like he did. I told her about the bowling thing, and that was kind of when I started to go. I'm not gonna say I was, but I started to open my mind to the possibility that I didn't know what I thought I knew about baseball, about training, about coaching, about showing these different movement patterns. And it's so much more than just a metric. Like a fastball is so much more than a fastball. And I think coming
Mhm.
from the strength side, um, and seeing like, hey, I need to get here, I need to get here. I still remember the same. We had a talk about my realization with pitching because pitchers come in all different shapes and sizes. You have the Randy Johnsons, the Roger Clements, right? What lets you do? Because pitching is absolutely insane to me. In the weight room, if you're doing a 1 rep max, if you're giving 100%, how many reps are you doing? Okay. How many pitches does a starting pitcher throw in a game? 70 to 100. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, right. A
yeah.
lot. So, okay. And now it's over like hours of time.
Mhm.
Those two don't line up. So, how does a guy give me, and again, guys are different, right? The higher levels they go, they can throw 85%, 90, 95, 100%. How do I get these guys giving these maximum intensities over long periods of time? There really is no training on that. How do they build that? And I remember asking you because I was learning how to do this and incredibly variable with athletes doing 10 trying to develop a training program for them. How do I get you pitchers? Like, what do you need from me? What do you need on the weight room side from me? And I remember you saying it's about positions. And I remember the moment you're like, strength is a good thing, but strength not being able to move or strength not being able to use the right way, it doesn't matter. Like it's if anything, it may hurt them. And all of a sudden you showed me some of the laying down on the ground, the 90-90s and different stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I can get them to those positions and treat it as not building an engine kind of thing, but upgrading their transmission, then we can add more horsepower if they need it. And
I love that.
it revolutionized the way that I look at pitchers because it went from this is what we need. I need you to hit this to what do you need?
Mm.
How do you move? How do you move the best? And it was a very big Dunning Kruger where like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, there's so much stuff that I don't know versus being the source of knowledge to like, I barely opened chapter one. What do you think in weight room going through it? Because I caught the end of it where baseball players shouldn't lift. Did you at the end of your career or even before, did you lift? Did you work out in the weight
That's
room?
absolutely. Yeah, and I think, what do they say? Strength is never a weakness,
Hmm.
right? But I think a lot of times it's more like there's only so many hours in a day. How am I going to get the most bang for my buck, if you will?
Right.
Um, so a lot of times when it comes to youth guys, I think it has to start with body weight conditioning, learn how to control their bodies, learn the movements, learn the patterns. Then we add
Yeah.
the resistance. I love stuff with bands. I think especially certain jumping, running, throwing, different stuff with the bands for feedback.
Right.
Different guys, different ways. In general, deadlifts, I'm not a huge fan of for pitchers. I've just had way too many guys hurt their back and try to do certain stuff. However, I think you do need a squat, a lunge, and a step up in every leg workout or every day that you're doing that kind of stuff. I think sprints is one of the best things we can do, especially if we can do uphill, downhill sprints, maybe even get into some sand. Um, but I think it varies based on the guy, right? But I've had a lot of guys who benefit a lot from strength and conditioning, but they have to learn how to convert it the throw or the hit. Meaning,
Right.
like let's say I'm doing a deadlift and I'm pulling force out of the ground. Does that immediately mean that I know how to put force into the ground to throw? And the answer is no, because I see a lot of kids that go and increase their deadlift, let's say by whatever percentage they calculate it by. They go and they go to these gyms and they're like, hey, I put 25 pounds on my deadlift. And they're throwing 2 miles an hour slower. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm not saying they're not going to learn how to use it. They might, but
Right.
it's like just because you can pull force out of the ground doesn't mean you can put force into the ground.
Right.
And I think the big thing too, especially when it comes to pitchers, is sometimes, you'll see a guy like Chapman that maybe gets a super amount. He's got a lot of range of motion,
Mhm.
but you'll see other guys that don't have as much range of motion and they still throw really good, right? So it's like
Right.
if you were doing squats and all I told you is we're gonna do, uh, we'll say butt to the grass. We won't rhyme
Yeah.
it right now, but so butt to the grass. And do I think there's time and place for that? Absolutely. Now, should there be one rep maxing all the time, or like, stuff like that? To me, I don't think so. I think there's a lot better stuff you can do
Mhm.
uh, to get results that you're after. I think a lot of times isometrics. So like even isometric holds. If I got a guy that's, let's say he wants to lunge or squat, but he can't even do a 2 minute ISO lunge, then I don't think I necessarily need to load him up yet.
Right.
Now, there's obviously within reason different stuff, but I think like even sprint work or plyometric stuff when it's blended into a lift. So like let's say I do a squat, a goblet squat, and I'm going from the goblet squat. Right after that, what I typically like to program is some type of a plyometric, so like a broad jump or a single leg hop to a single leg hop to a lot of times we'll go 2 feet hop, 1 foot hop, 1 foot hop, 2 foot land. It's one of
Right.
my favorite ones, right? Or an ice skater, something that's extremely explosive that takes the feeling of, let's say you got out of that movement, or like a box squat. I like box squats. Different guys get to different heights,
Mhm.
so you kind of see like what guys. Once again, you assess them, you see where they're at, and then like maybe you're doing a box squat and one guy's doing it on a tire, the other guy's doing it more on like a step stool,
Right.
right? But I think there has to be variability within there. But when it does, like overall, yes, we need more beast. Now, do you have to lift weights to be a beast? Not necessarily. I mean, you see guys like Herschel Walker that came up. If you ever read his story, where it's like he's a guy who did body weight stuff, and then all of a sudden he lifted weights and he's benching 250 like it's nothing, or 225 like they do with the combine. But I think physical conditioning is never ever a weakness, and typically physical conditioning is mental conditioning.
Yep.
And I think that's something that to go way old school, but like John Wooden, Bobby Knight, Judd Heathcote, like some of these old school basketball. I had to throw the Spartan in there, but is O too, but guys where it's like they're physically conditioning these guys, but they're doing it for a mental conditioning as well. It's not just, hey, how much weight can you move today? It's more like, hey, can you do something you've never done?
Right.
Or, can we push your thresholds a little bit further than they normally would go? But I think same thing where it's like if we're managing time and it's like, hey, I only have enough time to do this, this, or this today. Do I think going in and just squatting in a weight room is going to help you more than going out and doing, a legit throwing program and sprint program and doing stuff on the field? No, but I think the best guys are doing a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
They're not just doing like one thing and that's all they do. Like yoga, I love yoga. But if all you do is yoga, it's probably not going to only help. But if you can do some yoga and you can do some lifting and you can do some plyometrics and that
Right.
kind of thing, I think there's a lot of value to improving your athleticism. But I think
Athlete
too,
first.
when it comes to the weight, yes, athlete first. And then when it comes to the weight room, use it for the area to fix the inefficiencies we see on the field.
Mhm.
So, like, if you got a guy that's early rotating and he just, for whatever reason, he struggles with closing his shoulders or whatever, to just keep telling him, hey, close your shoulders, close your shoulders. That's it's like
Right.
banging your head into a wall and expecting something to change. It's not,
Right.
right. But if you put
That's
them in a weight room, you teach them a movement, you
right.
teach them the ranges, like you talked about, where it's like, yes, there's positions, but within those positions, there's movement, like the wave or the figure eight, right? Like it's
Mhm.
like, yes, we got to get to here, but how we get there is like this, right? Then it's
Mhm.
it's developing that pattern or that move.
Right. Well, hey, we're coming more, and I think it'd be
Holy
criminal.
cow!
It's fun, huh? Yeah. I definitely want to have you back because we haven't. I've gotten to probably maybe a third at best of the
So we'll come
questions
back.
that I had.
Yes, man, we'll
Um,
come back.
but to me, it would be a crime not to have you explain one day better. So I first heard this from you. I saw it throughout my playing career. I got yelled at and punished for not having high success. Like if I wasn't successful, regardless, I would get verbally yelled at. And I think it was a lot of how people saw me as a player, but it got me into coaching. What I found was the phrase "F it." I had a coach in Iowa tell me that, and I was the full
Okay,
thing. He
that's
had me
good.
right on my hat. What it was freedom to fail. And when I found when I heard you say "one day better," I think the first time I ever heard you say it, I was like, "What'd you say?" And what it I'm gonna have you explain it. But what it to me, it was 100% freedom to fail because in the game of baseball, the only person on the field that doesn't experience failure every single day is a successful starting pitcher, where failure is the exception to them. But everybody else, you're gonna fail. Hell, in 20, I believe it was 2017. Stanton had it was kind of when Statcast first started. Had the hardest hit ball that year. I think it was like 120.2 miles an hour. The result of that hardest hit ball of the year was a ground ball double play. Do you think Stanton's upset? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the game of
Hmm.
baseball.
Hmm.
When I found one day better, and you win. If you did, you get better today. You had freedom to fail. You had freedom to try. Can you explain how you got to one day better when you realized the power of it or whatever that phrase means to you? Because it certainly impacted my coaching career and my life as a method to go through life. And it has affected probably at this point 20 to 30 athletes just out of the Rebels organization. What does that mean to you? How did you figure it out?
So I think first of all, it started with just the idea of I'm going to get better every day. And then it was like I had guys who had big time experience, one in particular, and I think he pitched in the big leagues for 15 years. And I was coaching one of his kids. And he's like, Dang, I don't think I got better every day. And we kind of went through and we talked about, okay, what does that mean? And it's not results oriented. It's not. So I think that's where we had to kind of break it off where it's like, okay, I'm getting better every day, but it doesn't mean that every day the score sheet's going to show, oh, all of a sudden he's as a pitcher, his ERA was 3, now it's 2.9, now it's 2.8. It's not the outcome. One day better is the idea of it's me versus me, and that's all. Where it's like versus I see a lot of guys get distracted by what everybody else is doing. Where it's like, and I'm a victim of it myself at times. Where it's like I'd see the work I'm putting in, the results I got, and I'd see the work he put in and see the results he got. And we get into trouble when we start being like, oh, that's not fair. Well, yeah. Have you ever seen a baseball game that's fair? Like, yeah, we call a ball fair or foul, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything's fair. Right. And I think that's a life thing too. Right. But
Fair
anyway,
is a
so
four-letter word.
yeah,
Fair
it's
is
where
a
you go
four-letter
right
word.
and right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go right and right. And it's cool, but baseball is not fair. Okay.
Nope.
Even though the umpire says fair or foul. But the idea of one day better started to be where I was in my rehab process. You asked how it kind of started. It started through my rehab process where I'm going in, I'm doing my exercises, I'm doing all the stuff I'm supposed to do. And especially for me, it was a long time before I was allowed to throw. So, like, typically that's how I gauged my success. And then it had to start being okay, this is more than just, it's more than baseball. This is actually a lifestyle where, okay, what I eat has an influence on what I do. What I think about has an influence on what I do. Who I hang out with has an influence on what I do. And it started to make me look at like the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So like if I'm gonna keep myself over here, I'm gonna probably do the same thing over here. Versus if I know there's one right and there's the other guys that are doing everything else, I'm still going to do it right even if everyone else is doing the other way, right? So I think and nowadays I call it the one day better project because it's almost like if you ever go to yoga and you start a breath practice. Okay, do you breathe? Yes, you breathe naturally, right? You're built for survival, not for performance. So teaching yourself how to breathe better can actually help with body's always going to go to survival. It's not going to go to performance, right? So, anyways, the one day better project idea is that every day I'm going to do something that's going to make me better than I was yesterday. At that, right? So if it's these little acupressure mobility balls, and I'm here and I'm working on my breath, and there's certain stuff where it's like, okay, a lot of times how I judge my stuff nowadays is how present was I? How much was I in the activity I was doing versus focusing on something I got to do 2 hours from now, or something I did an hour ago, or something I'm doing in St. Louis, right? It's okay, was I fully present, fully engaged in my activity? Yes. Okay. So that's good, right? So kind of like changing those daily benchmarks that you're looking for. Did I hydrate? You know, did I was I nice to my teammates? Was I a good teammate? Was I did I fill my body with what I could have? But I think once you start to realize all the things that are inside your control, it gives you a lot more power. Because there was times where I felt helpless, let's just say, because there's no other word for it. I felt helpless because I thought I was doing the right work, and I thought I was guaranteed those results because the work I did, and it wasn't. Because sometimes I was chasing my tail. Sometimes I was, doing exercises or movements that, hey, they looked cool, or I saw, hey, this drill worked for somebody else on a Instagram feed, and I'm gonna go try it. Where it's like, okay, now, hey, sometimes you might pick something up on watching something, you get it, but a lot of times you have no idea the 200 other reps that happened that day that got that to happen. So I think the other part of the one day better project is, what can I control? Attitude, outlook, preparation. Okay. Polls would say, what can you control is your approach and your response as a hitter, right? Can't control what the pitcher gives you, can't control what the umpire calls, all those different things. Same thing as a human, right? Where it's like, what can I control today? Did I wake up on time to do my morning practice? Did I hydrate myself? Did I do all these little things? And then day after day, when you're going through this project and you're still checking all these little boxes, all of a sudden now your confidence starts to build, because you know that you've done everything you can that day to make yourself the best version of you that you can be in that moment. And then I think, anytime you can increase confidence for an athlete, at the end of the day, the performance is going to go higher, even though that wasn't the direct goal in that moment.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, I know that's kind of a roundabout way, but I think it's a path of ownership, and it's a path of learning to be your own best coach.
Right. No, I love it. I absolutely love that. Um, to finish off, the one question that I try and ask everybody: if you had, if you met an athlete, and this athlete was driven and wanted to succeed in the game of baseball, what is one piece of advice? I mean, it could be anyone, an outfielder, a pitcher, whatever you want. What is one piece of advice that you would give them if you knew that you were never going to see them again? This one nugget of wisdom, what would that be?
Hmm, that's a good one. I mean, I would say anything that's going to generate you to be consistent and chase your dream. I think the idea of somebody helping you versus your ownership is huge. So it's almost a blessing sometimes, where it's like, hey, take this nugget and run with it. Right. But it's like, keep showing up, keep doing the work.
I
Where it's
like.
that I really think the consistency thing is huge. Now, sometimes, yes, you need to take a step back, and you need to realize, is like you said earlier, I could tell you to dig a hole. Is that digging that hole going to make you better? Or like, even if we were trying to get to it, let's say we're going on a road trip and we have no map. We just start
Right.
driving down the road, and we just keep driving. Does that get us there? Well, no, right?
We have
I
a
mean,
good
it's going
time.
to get us somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's like, yes, we need to put our head down and work, but at the same time, we need to say, is what I'm doing getting me the results I'm after? And then I think just being open to the idea of failing forward, keep failing
I like that.
forward, because the failure is, it's the tread, it's the idea of, I can grab something and move on to the next thing. It's the, like the tread of a tire, where you're driving up
Right.
something and it can grab it, But I think, um, if you can build that consistency in your work habits, you're going to go a long ways.
I like that. Where can people find you? Websites or social media accounts?
My website is fuelfactorysports.com. On Twitter, I'm Zinger29. I'm on that a little bit, but not a lot. More on the Instagram, and that is Coach Zinger or Fuel Factory. I have two different accounts. Somebody else helps with the one, and I run the other one. And then I am on the old TikTok now too. My kids got me to get on the old TikTok, so I'm Zing Fuel Factory on there. So
Are you doing dances?
not yet, but maybe we'll get there.
That's awesome, man. I'm gonna have to get you on again because again, I got barely
Yes, yes.
through any of the questions. I appreciate you being here, man. Oh now,
Oh, man. Thanks for
oh
briefing
now.
me.
Appreciate you, brother.